Everybody that knows what it feels like to go to a live concert knows that nothing can replace it. No recording, no telecast can exchange and replace the wonderful experience to sit next to somebody who is excited and watch a group of people who is excited on stage. And I really look forward to bringing that back because we have been missing it for a long, long time. And I specifically chose pieces for the first season that have the ability and the power to make everybody fall in love with music all over again.
This year has been an interesting journey because there was a while where we weren't performing at all. We weren't together, our friends, our family, our musical family, we just weren't together, like people weren't with their families. And finally we decided we were going to stream some concerts, and we got back in the room together, and it was, wow, this is so amazing to be together making music. So that was a plus. But we all knew we were missing something, and that was the audience. We get so much energy and love from the audience, it really makes us want to play our best. So we're all looking forward to that. And I think it's going to be one of the most exciting years we've ever had, because the energy from us getting all back together is going to be so joyous and electrifying.
Starting with the last concert first, it's Mahler's Second Symphony, the Resurrection Symphony. And I think that is a banner over our entire symphony, because we will come back from over a year of not having played. So it in many ways is a resurrection of the Rochester Philharmonic playing on stage again. It's a resurrection of playing for real people and real chairs again. And I have been very careful to choose pieces that all have this message, that we come from so many, many months of not being able to be together and enjoy music together. And at the end, there's a shining light.
I never think of one season as the season to make some grand statement. I usually think of 3 or 4 seasons. What are we trying to do over a longer period of time? So we have some really interesting popular music concerts. And when I say that, I'm talking about pop music. I'm talking about Paul Simon. I'm thinking of Kings of Soul, people like Marvin Gaye, Lou Rawls. And then our Beatles concert is incredible. And of course, you know, Paul Simon and all of the Motown and the Beatles all use symphonic instruments. They use strings, they use woodwinds, they use brass. So I've created these arrangements for these 3 concerts to sound very authentic.
So we were going for a very colorful and balanced season. We wanted, on the one hand, as I said before, have all these pieces that make you fall in love with music all over again. And on the other hand, we wanted to have a lot of new voices. We wanted to have a lot of new conductors on the podium. We wanted to have a lot of debuts as soloists and have a couple of premieres as well, pieces that have never been performed before and are especially written for the Rochester Philharmonic. Among them, a new violin concerto by Puerto Rican composer Roberto Sierra and a new piano concerto by wonderful composer Jesse Montgomery. We also have some wonderful debuts on the podium, among others, the son of the great conductor Kurt Masur. His name is Ken David Masur. Another great debut is by Lina Gonzalez Granados, one of the very, very talented young female conductors, and she has a wonderful Latin American program in stock for us. So I think all around we will hear a lot of music that we love and know, and a lot of new things that we have not encountered yet.
I also really love John Williams' music, and we're celebrating his 90th birthday. Nobody writes for symphony orchestra currently in that symphonic film world like John Williams, and he's got a 40-year history of music that we're going to be showcasing on that concert.
I'm looking forward to welcome some wonderful guest soloists to the Rochester Philharmonic, some of them being my close friends and some people that I have worked with many times, and look forward to welcome now at my new home. For example, the opening concert will be the violin concerto by Jennifer Higdon, played by a wonderful violinist, Benjamin Beilman, whom I've worked a couple of times. I know you will enjoy him very much. One of my good friends, Avadajan Prat, pianist, will play the world premiere of the Montgomery Piano Concerto. We have some wonderful singers. We have Michelle de Jong, who will join us in the Resurrection Symphony by Mahler. And I especially look forward to welcoming my friend Claudio Bojorquez, who will play that wonderful toned poem by Richard Strauss, Don Quixote.
I love Broadway. I'm not conducting the Broadway concert. A really gifted young conductor from Broadway, William Waldrop, who recently did 2 years of 8 performances a week of Cats, is putting that show together, but we're going to be showcasing new and vintage Broadway shows, and that's always great music.
And we have some good friends coming back. I'm looking forward that Jeff Tyzek is doing a concert with all movie music. As you know, we're going to share the podium. He's going to conduct on the subscription series, and I'm going to conduct on the pop series.
I'm really honored that Andreas asked me to appear on the classical series next year. and I'm thrilled to be doing a concert of classic film music. Music from Psycho, music from Prince Valiant, a great John Waxman score, Taxi Driver. I'm a little jealous of Andreas. I've worked with Ann Hampton Callaway a number of times. She is phenomenal. I'm so glad he's going to be working with her. I mean, she has such great material, and the way she engages the audience is phenomenal.
I would very much hope that our audience, after having been deprived for so many months of live concerts, would enjoy every concert as a special event that really reinvigorates them and makes them fall in love with music all over again and makes them take something home with them. I think a good piece of symphonic music shows you the potential of what you can aspire to be. And this kind of positive feeling about the future, about yourself, about your possibilities is something that I try to do in every single concert I conduct, and I hope that our listeners and the people that come to our concerts will be able to take home with them.
So I think the season is something that people can really hold on to of all different ages, all different genres, and it's a strong season. I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm Julia Figueres from WXXI, and I am very happy to be talking with the new music director of your Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra, Maestro Andreas Delfs. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And welcome back to Rochester.
Lovely to see you.
I'm so happy to see you too. You are lucky number 13 of music directors for the RPO, but you're part of our Rochester Finger Lakes community. You have a house in Trumansburg.
Yes, I had a house for better part of 26 years, I think.
How did you happen upon Trumansburg?
Well, I went to Juilliard. That was one of the places where I studied. And my cousin from Germany had emigrated to the United States, and she had a restaurant in Ithaca. So whenever I had the $40 or whatever it cost to take the Greyhound up from New York to Ithaca, I did that, and on holidays and when I was hungry, and spent a lot of time there and loved the Finger Lakes area. I felt immediately at home there. And when I realized that in my life I will always move, 3 years here, 6 years here, 8 years here, that's how it is in a conductor's life. I wanted one home that stayed the same for my family, that wouldn't change all the time. So we bought that house there on a beautiful lake. It's about 10 minutes out of Ithaca, and spent summers there. For the first 20 years, we went there every summer. And these last couple of years, we've lived there full time.
Okay, so now you don't have to move around. You're all settled, and you have a job close to home, so it works out perfectly. You have a bit of history with the RPO. Do you remember your first appearance with the orchestra?
I do remember very well. It was about 25 years ago, and it was one of my first professional gigs. I had just had management, and I was still assistant conductor, I think, at the time in Pittsburgh, working with Lauren Mazel, but this was one of my first real guest engagements. And it was Beethoven 5, and that's, as you know, it's a kind of a testing ground for orchestra-conductor relationship. Does it gel or does it not? And it went wonderful, and we had such a good time from the first moment on. And as you know, since then I've been back many times.
Many times, and we just love it when you come back. So what is it about this orchestra that's special to you?
It's a good question, because when conductors or orchestra players have to talk about what makes a relationship between orchestra and conductor special, we don't have the right words. We escape to expressions like chemistry or things like that, because it is very hard to describe. It is I mentioned Beethoven 1, a piece that I love since I was very small and studied very well and know very well, but then you meet a group of musicians, 60, 70, 80 of them, that all know it very well and all have played it many, many times. So how does this go together? You have very accomplished, mature musicians, and back then a relatively young conductor, and so many different opinions of the piece. It can be a disaster and a fight from the first to the last note, which happens, and it can be a wonderful, harmonious finding a middle ground. And why that sometimes happens and sometimes not, I cannot explain to you. With this orchestra, what is so special that they are such a great group, not only accomplished individual musicians, but also as a whole. So you very quickly come to the moment where you can forget the technical difficulties of bringing the piece together, which there are, But with this orchestra, and obviously the way that I conduct, we left that behind of our rehearsal very quickly. And then you start to get where it's really interesting in music, under the skin of the music, behind the lines and the little dots. And you get to a level that we as musicians all want to get to, the truth in the music, the meaning in the music, the depth in the music. And I can only tell you, after 40 years or so of experience, with some orchestras you reach that level, and with others you don't. Why that is, I don't know. But I know with the Rochester Philharmonic it happened from the first time that I conducted them and through every single visit that I paid here.
Now you come here at a very fraught time. Things are very difficult and your to-do list is very, very long. So let's start with equity. There have been a lot of discussions about the classical world, about the lack of equity and diversity in the classical world. So I ask you, Andreas, what needs to be done, both in the orchestra and in the programming, to better reflect our society?
To better reflect our society and the specific mix-up that the community that you work for is composed of. Otherwise you work in a vacuum, and we all know that. Julia, I think one thing that we cannot forget, because it would be unrealistic, is that an orchestra, like a sports team, is based on excellence. We cannot suddenly change that. But what we can do is to help foster this level of excellence that we want throughout all levels of society and through all ethnicities. And it has to start very early on. I think the problem is not that the communities that we work in is not well reflected in the mix-up of the orchestra. The problem is not that we don't hire enough people that come from an ethnic minority or from a social different background, but that the choice of players we have is already limited at the conservatory level. I spent many years teaching and working at universities, and even there the balance is not the same balance that the community at large represents. I think what I would like to do as music director of the Rochester Philharmonic is engage my colleagues to become mentors for young musicians from backgrounds that are not naturally coming to classical music early on. I mean that we need to find talented musicians from all walks of life, from all ethnicities, and offer our help early on in their lives when they start to learn instruments. Because the problem is, you know that yourself because you have children who play music, when young people grow up in a family that doesn't originally favor and foster classical music, and maybe also come from a socio-economic background where you know what lessons cost, $50, $100, $150, where that is not in the cards. So I think orchestras all around need to start at that level, foster young talent pro bono in a way that every orchestra player adopts a talented kid that we could identify through the school system that normally would not come to an instrument in any other way. Because the problem is not that we don't hire in the orchestra world enough people from minority ethnicities and different socioeconomic backgrounds, but there are simply not enough in the final rounds of those kind of auditions. And we need to stay, like any sports team, any baseball and basketball teams, we need to stay a competitive group where the artistic excellence is the only borderline that decides whether people come in or not.
So now we're talking about music in the schools then, and finding a way to reach into the schools. I mean, there was a period of time when the RPO played every single school in the greater Monroe County area on a 4-year rotating schedule, so that every kid could see the orchestra in his or her high school at least once in his or her life. And so now you're talking about something that's really kind of a big deal, a big project, is bringing this back to the schools.
Yeah. What you talked about is and many American orchestras do that very successfully, is to raise the next generation of audience and hopefully find new audiences in areas where they not naturally would have an opportunity to see the orchestra. But I'm really talking about teaching young people, kids, to play an instrument. It's as simple as that. You know, how many kids are not encouraged by their parents to take piano lessons or violin lessons or trumpet lessons, whatever it is, because the parents either work 3 jobs or come themselves from a family where classical music was not a big deal. But that doesn't mean that these kids might not have the talent. And I think that's where we need to open up much more the pool of talent that an orchestra has as teachers, and bring it to those people and say, we offer you a half year or a year free lessons. Here's my number 3 trumpet. You can borrow it for the time, or you can give it as a present. But just that more people from different backgrounds have a chance to learn an instrument. I think then eventually, of course it's a long, slow process, it will filter through to the conservatories, and there will be more ethnic colorization and diversification in the conservatories, which then make the auditions for major orchestras that look for the highest quality much more diversified as well.
It's a frustration because the concept of music in schools has become an extra, as they call it. And it has been thrown, music classes and art classes have been thrown into this weird category called extras. Without an understanding on the syllabus level that the arts are really important. They bring so much to the life of a young student. And in fact, it might be the only thing that makes any little boy or little girl happy in school is that chance to be in chorus, to be in band, to be in art class. And yet we've gotten to this place where it's somehow an extra in our society, which it should not be.
No. Julia, in my mind, there's no question that we need to do more. Because people like you and me who have spent our whole life in music, we know that music is essential, right? That it's not just a luxury item or an elite item, but that it can be the basis of your life and the anchor in your life, the one anchor that keeps reminding you of your human potential. And I think many, many more people need to experience that and stop thinking of music as I said before, you know, like an add-on or something that is superfluous, and recognize that music can and should be an essential part of your life. And I think we need to start much earlier, putting instruments in children's hands and say, this first-rate musicians will spend 6 months with you really teaching you this. And then we see how it goes and see whether this talent developed. But that's how we get a more diversified group that then might be able to move on to conservatories and ultimately to major orchestras.
Was that what it was like when you were growing up as a kid?
Well, you know, I grew up in Germany and we were given an instrument. I think I was 8 or 9 years old and I was given a bassoon. I had never seen a bassoon or heard of a bassoon, didn't know what kind of sound it would make, but I got my bassoon. It was a not very good instrument, but I got it. I got lessons from the principal bassoon player of our local orchestra. I don't think they were totally free, but they were very affordable. And after 3 months, 4 months maybe, I became part of the school orchestra. And you know how it went after that. I loved music, I loved symphonic music, I wanted to be a conductor, and here I am. But it was really at that point, yes, music was treasured in our household, which is a good starting point. But as far as playing an orchestra instrument, my mother would have never thought of giving me a bassoon, so here I am.
You know, I was so surprised one day when our daughter, who was I think 7 or 8 at the time, came home and announced she was going to play the bassoon. And to this day, I don't know what got into her head, but there you go. And she went with it. And it gave her a great deal. And it gave her a lot of friendships and experiences. And I would love to see that.
That's what needs to happen. You say a great deal. What does it mean, a great deal? It needs to be able to go to a kid that would never think, as you just said, about it and say, here is a flute. You can have it for 6 months, and I give you a lesson for 6 months, and then we see. That opportunity is what I think orchestras need to get much more involved in.
Now there's another piece of this, and that's programming for equity. And I'm very excited to see that you have a world premiere of Jessie Montgomery with Awadagem Pratt playing the piano concerto. The programming becomes another issue too, because this has been decades and decades and decades of pieces by people of color and women not getting programmed in orchestras. So how do you break down that wall?
Well, a lot has happened. There are so many talented composers from minorities and women composers now. When I started out in the business, it was really hard to find. But now, I mean, you notice there's a wonderful composer that I love, Sarah Kirkland Snyder, on our program with a piece that we do. I conducted that about half a year ago. And I conduct a lot of Anna Klein's music. And it's just, you have much more choice. And as far as composers go, you're right, we have that world premiere of a piano concerto from Jesse Montgomery. We also have the world premiere of a Puerto Rican composer, Roberto Sierra, with the violin concerto. These are established people. They are having a career and we know that they're good. What's important is that we seek out those who are just at the beginning of their career and where a performance or a commission might really make a difference, whether this young composer or even this young soloist stays the track, because you know it's very hard to grab a foothold as a composer. To be performed by orchestras is not easy. And I've known many talents who gave up after a while because they needed to earn money and have a real job and a family. And it takes a long time for a composer before he or she can actually live from composing. But our job as programmers is to find them, seek them out, stay in touch with conservatories saying, who do you have who shows promise? Stay in touch with the publishing houses that publish contemporary music and said, who is your next up and coming? Who do you believe in that I should look at? So the times are much better. We have much more choice now, and the choices increase because we give it a little bit more attention.
When I look back, I also see this whole string of women composers who existed. Louise Ferrant comes to mind immediately. Clara Schumann and Fanny Mendelssohn, wonderful composers, both of the Boulanger sisters. And these things seem to have sort of been created, been well liked when they were performed, and then just vanished off the face of the earth as if they never happened.
Yeah, it's true. You hear, I mean, people like Fanny Mendelssohn and Clara Schumann, you hear more often. The problem with those enormous talents is that in their own time, they were already suppressed. Fanny Mendelssohn was the little sister of Felix, and you stay home and let Felix have the glory. And Clara Schumann was the virtuoso pianist who was seen as the prophet of her husband Robert Schumann's works, but not as a composer in her own right. Unfortunately, these women didn't write that much. You see in what little they have that they were enormous talents, and if they had given more of a push and more recognition, they might have developed into very prolific and wonderful composers, but they were curbed. And that happened really, it still happens in our time. It's better in our time now, but it really went on like that for many, many decades.
Now, one of the dangers I've always seen in programming is the lip service. You know, the little modern overture and all the rest is something that's old and probably white as well. And so when I looked at the season, I was really thrilled to see that that's not happening this season. You are giving significant time to composers, Brian Neighbors, Gabrielle Lena Frank, Leah Auerbach, of course Jennifer Higdon, who doesn't love Jennifer Higdon, Sarah Kirkland Snyder. These are not household names. Well, Jennifer Higdon kind of is, but you are giving a real moment for these composers, and I find that thrilling.
Yeah, well, I love their music. And again, we talked earlier about artistic excellence. I tell you, I would not demean them by saying I program you because you're a woman composer. I program them because they write really wonderful music that I can relate to and that I love. And with many of these, we want to build a relationship, and we want to build trust between those names and the Rochester audience, that they know, well, the first time I didn't know the name, but next season when I come back and read the name again, I know that I loved that music.
I think of Jennifer Higdon, and that harp concerto just blew out the door, the Grammy Award-winning harp concerto, because now everybody in Rochester who goes to see a concert knows who Jennifer Higdon is, and they are willing to take the ride, because it was so exciting.
It's all about building trust, and as I said before, there is just so many more artists now that we can build trust on, and then we can build trust to our listeners that the music is wonderful and the performance is wonderful.
So how do you balance a concert? How do you balance a season when you're coming in and you're looking at bringing in composers of color, women composers, plus the standard rep? How are you balancing that?
Well, Julia, this is a very special season because we have been dark for such a long time. You know, by the time that we start this season in September, it will be over 1.5 years that the orchestra had not really performed in front of an audience. So I want to be prepared for the situation that might arise, that some people at that point might not be quite ready yet to go out in public and with a big group of people. But there might also be people who say, well, I did okay without for 18 months, so show me what you've got. And I want to program a lot of music that is the kind of piece that made people fall in love with symphonic music. We all have those pieces when we heard, I don't know what it was for you. For me, it was Beethoven 7. What was it for you?
Beethoven 7.
No, really?
Yeah.
This is not rehearsed.
Yeah.
The piece.
We just did the 12 Days of Beethoven,
Yeah.
where we played all the symphonies, but we also chose things we loved. I chose that one, and my statement about it was, it's perfect.
Yeah, it is. And we all have this kind of piece of music where lightning struck and made us lifelong lovers of music. And I try to program a lot of those pieces because I want people to come back and say, gee, we missed this. Boy, did we miss this. And to balance that with what you mentioned earlier, diversified program, a lot of new things, building trust between the audience and new composer and frankly new soloists that they've never seen. That's very important for me to balance that. And I think we got a kind of good balance. We'll see how people react. But that was what I was going for.
So over the years, have you seen tastes change in audience ears?
It's surprising how little change in preference there is. I just did something with my students. I said, next semester you can choose what we play. Make me a top 10 list of your preferred classical pieces that you would do to do in the student orchestra. And it was the same than 50 years ago. It was Tchaikovsky 4 and Beethoven 7 and Brahms 1 and very, very little change. I think when it comes to what we call the war horses, you know, the big staples of the repertory, things have not much changed. But the openness and the willingness to give new pieces a try, that has changed quite a bit. Because people have heard so many changes in style in contemporary music in the last 25 years, I think, that their ears are open to a lot, from minimal music to dodecaphonic music to just chance music. There's a lot of different approaches that people are willing to give a chance. And that's what I hear. When I now perform a contemporary piece, a world premiere or something that's new to the audience, I don't get this reaction anymore that after 10 bars people start to look at their watches or their cell phones. And you know, it used to be that people even left. That has gotten much better. People are willing to give a new piece a much longer and a much better informed chance. And that helps us, of course, to build repertory, because when we know what works with an audience, I mean, second time that I mentioned Sarah Kirkland-Sneeder, because I was amazed how well her music goes with the audience, how many good feedback reports I got from her music. I loved it when I opened the page, but you never know how the audience will react. So we have a much more open audience now, I think.
There's always this discussion about getting the younger audience into the concert hall. How do we get the 20s and the 30s and the 40s? I mean, Chicago has been at, on the average, 55 since day one.
Yeah.
So is there a trick to getting younger folks into the audience? Does it matter? Will these people eventually come anyway?
It has been a long, long time that the average audience for symphony orchestra is a little bit older. And as you know, especially American orchestras, but everybody internationally, there's lots of experiments to change that with not so much success. So I think in the one way, classical music needs a certain maturity, which doesn't mean that you have to be a trained musician or a scholar, but you know, just a certain life maturity. When you want to hear something like the Second Symphony of Mahler, which really encompasses the whole mountain of experience that is life, and you are a teenager, yeah, I'm sure there are certain things that you can relate to, but the whole gamut of emotions, you have to live a little bit longer to be able to relate to that, I think. That doesn't mean that we should not constantly try to bring younger audiences in it. And one big stumbling stone is always the procedure. You know, when what I hear most, what makes young people uncomfortable in a concert, it's not the music. It's that they don't know the decorum, and am I allowed to clap here, and what is this, and why do I have to dress up? And that is something that I see slowly changing. I see orchestras in their behavior and demeanor on stage being more relaxed and more open to different things than they used to be. I really don't think it's the music. I think when we continue to identify certain pieces on our season program by saying this would be especially suitable for a young person's first experience. Take one example, we do Hansel and Gretel, you know, in English. So we can say, this is certainly something for the whole family, where young people will understand what's going on, because we do it semi-staged. It will be in English and not in German. I think we need to choose those pieces, identify them clearly, and say this might be a good opportunity where your 8, 10, 12, 16-year-old child might have that moment that we discussed earlier, where lightning strikes and they become lifelong fans of classical music.
So is it time to take off the tuxes?
I personally like tuxes because I think that is our uniform that says this is something that we did as a group and that we perform as a well-trained ensemble. It's the same with what people wear at basketball, you know? It shows that we're a team and that we go into the same direction and that we try to create something very special, uniform. And but if the majority of the orchestra would come and say we would like to change that, I'd be fine with that too. I just the tails for me mean we're proud of a tradition, and there's nothing wrong with that.
You mentioned Hansel and Gretel, and this was something that Ward Stair started, was the semi-staged opera as part of the season, and you chose to do Hansel and Gretel just before Christmas time, just before the Nutcracker, which I love. I love it very much. So are you keeping the opera?
Oh yeah, certainly. I did that all the time in my tenure in Milwaukee, for example. Every year we had an opera, because I think if you live in a community that loves music but doesn't have a dedicated opera house like Chicago Lyric or Metropolitan Opera, so you get your measure of opera. And I know there are performing groups here that do wonderful staged performances of opera, but you don't get your Turandot, or you don't get your Valkyrie, or you don't get your romantic shining opera like Hansel and Gretel. You don't get often the full orchestra sound that so many great composers excelled in when they write opera. So they have a right to once a year hear grand, beautiful romantic opera, I think.
So one of the things we haven't really talked about yet is the pandemic, which is the big elephant in the room. And I'm assuming that you're hoping that we're going to be back at Kodak Hall in September.
Yeah, certainly. We talked briefly about it when I said I want to have this season full of pieces that remind people of what they have missed for the last couple of months.
This pandemic has had a really devastating impact on the arts. And now it's time to build back. And there have been changes in technology and delivery of the arts. As we build back, are some of those changes going to stay, do you think?
Yeah, we noticed, for example, that our audience really likes our streamed concerts that we do right now in lieu of being able to perform at Kodak Hall. So we keep a little series of those streamed concerts because people really enjoyed that. And I think that the flexibility that was needed from orchestras around the world, because of those restraints, you can only play with 20 people or 15 or whatever the recent number is, it's different everywhere else. That restriction has also led people like me to go back to our catalog and say, what is there maybe for 15 or 20 people that we have not done in a while? And we discovered a whole wonderful new group of pieces that we will continue to perform, even though we might be able to play with 80 or 90 people now, but we might still every once in a while to do one of these quirky pieces with smaller orchestration because they're wonderful. And we didn't do them in such a long time because we didn't have to, but these last few months we had to.
Now, I am intrigued by you making your debut as a pops conductor
No, it's not my debut. Here it is my debut.
here in Rochester.
But
yeah.
I've always loved certain kinds of pop music. I love the American songbook. Somebody asked me earlier what music plays in your house, and I said it's certainly not Alpen Symphony or something like that. It's mostly the great recordings that Ella Fitzgerald did of the Cole Porter songbook or the Gershwin songbook or the Rodgers and Hammerstein. I just love what is known as the Great American Songbook. And whenever I have an excuse to do that, I do it. I did it in Milwaukee. I was very good friends, as you know, with our principal pops conductor, Doc Severinsen, and I'm very good friends with Jeff Tyzek. So one of the first things we did is we said, you come to my series and do a symphonic program of movie music, and I come to your series and bring my dear friend Ann Hampton Calloway, who does this repertory so well.
She's so good.
Oh, I love her. And so we're going to do an evening of the American Songbook.
It's really nice. I noticed that, yes, that Jeff gets his side in the Philharmonics too, so that's fair and square. You're going to be following in the footsteps of great conductors. And each conductor, music director, has left some kind of a legacy with the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra. So, Andreas, what are you hoping your legacy is going to be?
Let me answer the question this way. My legacy in Milwaukee, where I was for 12 years, is that I built an indestructible bond between the community and the orchestra. I think everybody there would tell you, Milwaukee with orchestra, unthinkable. We couldn't imagine that. And I'm very proud of that, because as orchestras, music makers, we always have to question our relevance. You know, because there are people who don't go to concert and they say, oh, it's an elite group sitting in an ivory tower that costs a lot of money. What I've always worked on is to deal with that prejudice and say, no, we are essential. We are part of your community. You cannot imagine a community without this orchestra. And that's what I would love to do here. I think to a certain degree it already exists here. This is such an art and music loving town, and I think people are incredibly proud of the Rochester Philharmonic. But I really want everybody in Rochester, even those who never go, to know that a future of Rochester without the Rochester Philharmonic is unthinkable.
I want to thank you very much for spending time with me. But before you go, Andreas, we have the speed round. It's 5 easy questions so people can get to know you a little better. Are you ready?
All right.
All right. Dogs or cats?
Dog, singular. There's only one, and that's my beloved German Spitz, Casper.
Manhattan or Martini?
Both at the same time together.
If you could listen to only one piece of music for the rest of your life, what would it be?
The Bach suites for solo cello. And I'm in good company there. I recently had the good fortune to meet Sting, and we talked about exactly that question. And we said at the same time, Bach suites. He doubled up with saying it has to be Yo-Yo Ma's recording. I'm a little bit more flexible in that, but I would say Bach.
What are you reading, and what's next on your reading list?
I got for Christmas David Sedaris' book. It's all his best stories. I forgot the title, but it's all his highlights, the best pieces he ever wrote. And I love it, and I enjoy it very much. And what was the second half?
And what's next on your reading list?
The next on my reading list is 4 volumes of Thomas Mann, which is the last Thomas Mann that I have not read. It's called Josef und seine Brüder, Joseph and his brothers. For thousands of pages of biblical narration. And I promised my wife I would do it because it's missing in our list of books that we can discuss with each other. So that's going to be a hard one.
Yeah, that's going to be a long
Yes.
project. And finally, aisle or window?
Window. I like to see landscapes and time and people passing by me.
Well, I'm aisle, so apparently we'll be a perfect
we can travel
companions.
together. Good.
Thank you again very much. And again, congratulations and welcome to Rochester.
Thank you so
Maestro
much.
Andreas Staufs.
Thank you.